What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us for Coach Convos Episode 2. We're going to talk today a little bit about lessons learned throughout our years in the coaching field and how that they've made us a better coach. I'll start it. I'm TK Kiernan from Sacred Heart University. We compete in the Northeast Conference, and we're located in Fairfield, Connecticut.
I'm Steve Adkins from Fairleigh Dickinson University, Northeast Conference, and we're in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Nate Cole, assistant baseball coach at UMass. We compete in the Atlantic 10 Conference, and we are located in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Pat Egan, Quinnipiac University, assistant baseball coach. We're in the Metro Atlantic Conference, and we're in Hamden, Connecticut.
All right, awesome. So listen, I'm really excited to have you guys on. For those listening, these are three guys that I really respect, and I see, out recruiting all the time, and we have really good conversations and challenge each other. So I guess to kind of get it going, I'll start by a lesson that I've learned, as opposed to leaving it to an open-ended question. A lesson that I've learned in my 6 years now coaching at the collegiate level. I was playing right before this, so I kind of jumped in pretty green with not a great idea of what to expect, but I had great mentors. One of the things that really stuck with me when I needed to take on more of a presence on our coaching staff, okay? Like, guys were starting to lean on me a little bit more and look for some information. I realized that communicating with them was the most important thing I could do on a daily basis. And I'll just start. There's a lot of different avenues to go down with communication, but I'll start with there's some guys that I communicated really well with because we saw eye to eye and we were similar type people and our brains operated the same way. But those who weren't necessarily as comparable to me were the ones that I was having difficulty connecting with via my communication, whether that was in a drill or it was out on the field or it was off the field and what we expected and how we wanted things to get done. And I think the sooner that I got to communicate in different ways with different people has made me a better coach. And maybe some guys will dispute that, but I really think that I get further with guys that I have now that I'm willing and able to speak closer to their terms. I'm not giving in, but closer to their terms to get the message across. Have any of you guys kind of had an experience like that where maybe the communication has kind of gone from an elementary level to now a more complex level that's kind of paid dividends for you?
Yeah, no doubt. Either one of you guys want to start before I win or no?
Yeah, I've had it, Steve.
But no, TK, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I had kind of thought about too when you prompted that question. But I always kind of look at it as looking at different personality types, kind of like you touched on, and learning styles as well. I just think it kind of took me a little bit, as a coach to learn that not every single guy learns like I do. And it's a little bit of trial and error with that. Unfortunately, I think it took me a little bit too long to realize that I needed to adapt the way that I would communicate with guys and the way I would go about teaching styles with various things, just based on learning styles. And I think that's something that we all get better at. The more you go through coaching is you learn, okay, this kid right here, he's got to be able to feel what I'm talking about. He's got to be able to go through the motions. Other guys got to write it down. Other guys got to hear it, different things like that. I think as soon as I learned that, I need to understand quicker how this kid learns best, and I can get through to him a little bit better. And that's one of the biggest things that's made me a better coach. Not learning more about the delivery, not learning pitch design and different things. Just learn how to communicate with guys better on an individual basis.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head pretty good. I guess in a different aspect, the biggest thing I've had to do with the communication aspect is learning the way different guys understand things, right? So I think every pitcher, every player has got their own kind of lingo they've grown up with. So you being able to tell one kid one thing and he applies it the way that you mean, and then you turn to the next kid and you say the exact same thing and he interprets it in a completely in a completely different way. So I think being able to learn how, every kid and what their lingo is, what their cues are, and how you can get through to them is probably easily the most important thing I've been able to take away, is that, every year you're going to have new guys cycling through, and you got to kind of learn their process. You got to learn the things that make them tick. You also got to learn how it is you have to approach your work with them. Oh, thanks, dear. Appreciate that. Sorry, my daughter wanted to drop off a note. But I think the other part was,
Has got a writing staff with him. That's not fair.
yeah, I mean, she's giving me exactly what I need to say. So let me just read this real quick. But but I think for me, it's been the process of learning what environment guys learn in the best. Some guys I can, learn pretty quickly on the fly in a bullpen, where you can just have a pretty easy communication with them and say one or two things and they pick up on what you're saying. Some other guys need to put a little bit more work in, in the outfield with them when they're going through their catch play, or if some guys are going through some flat ground stuff. Or I think when you can figure out how each individual kid ticks a little bit, and you learn their process, and then you're able to also learn how they get queued up on, and those type of things that trigger them, that's when you really start to get things to click with each guy.
I think for me, a big piece of the puzzle really starts or learned in the recruiting process, and that's maybe the advantage of getting to know kids, and again, each kid sometimes is a little bit different, but, as you guys know, maybe we're recruiting them in their senior, junior, sophomore years of high school. And, sometimes that's 3 years of getting to know a kid before they step foot on campus. And going back to what you said, T, the communication aspect, and then getting to know a kid's family, and getting to know, some things that he likes to do off the field, some of his hobbies and characteristics, of his personality, and as, Pat said, what makes him tick and things like that. So, just kind of coming to the understanding at some point, that, hey, the recruiting process is just so vital for being able to have success when they get on campus, and it's really tough to, to get to know a kid in the freshman year of his, in the fall, and expect him to kind of just gravitate to what you're saying right away. There's got to be a relationship that's formed prior to that. So, and again, not to sound corny, but it's the age old, phrase where they don't care how much you know until they know, how much you care. And it is true. And I think that's certainly something that I've learned, throughout my career.
No, I think that's really good. And the spin on it, as opposed to treating them as just an athlete that is under your tutelage, they're a kid or a young adult who's under your care, and you're responsible or partly responsible for the growth of them as a person. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, Nate, like getting to know them through the recruiting process gives you that added sense of who they really are. And it might not mean that they step on campus and you have that chemistry, but it means that you should be invested in them more than just from an X's and O's standpoint, right? And when they know that that's how they're being treated, you're going to see the lines of communication open up. And I'll kind of spin that into something that I was thinking about while you guys were talking was, communication is huge, but like interpersonal, like between a player and a coach. But what about like one thing that's made me better is how I communicate, maybe not so much prior, but post game in a setting where, maybe there's nothing good to say. Maybe we punched 15 times and we got shut out and we didn't throw it. We couldn't throw strikes. Like maybe there's nothing good to say. So how am I going to communicate in order to put us in a place to get better? Do you know what I mean? Like that's how I look at it. And I know some coaches will be on the opposite side and lay into guys. And I've laid into guys, and there isn't a right way or a wrong way. I tend to digest and communicate like just the facts of what happened and then a solution, which has worked for me. But I think being able to learn that I need to be removed from it a little bit. So I might not want to talk to the guys right after the game. I might wait till the next day, at breakfast, or send a text, or, whether it's pre-practice or pre-game, like to get my message across, because that's when I communicate most clearly. I mean, we're all different, but when do you guys feel like is maybe your favorite time to coach, like when something is going wrong? Like, is it in the moment? Is it after? Is it with a certain kid when you can get on them, have at it?
I think I'll speak for myself. I mean, maybe being a little bit of the elder statesman in the group here, just in terms of years of experience. I mean, you live and you learn, and there's been times where I probably spoke after a game when I shouldn't have, and then there's times when, maybe you're being too positive and they need to hear the truth. But I just say that because it's just through learned experiences. I think I'm similar to what you alluded to, T, that, I like to kind of take a step away for a little bit and maybe take a look at some video or the actual numbers and be able to make sure that I'm communicating, the truth or communicating clearly to what's going to best help the player. But, I think that goes back to, just in terms of learning, I've been, coaching college baseball here for 14, 15 years and probably started, responsible for a pitching staff when I was 22, 23 years old. And I've made a zillion mistakes, and it's about learning from those mistakes. I certainly am a lot different coach than I am, today than I was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, 12 years ago. So it's learning from those experiences, learning from those mistakes, and growing from them.
And it's go ahead, Pat.
No, Steve, you know what? You go right ahead, big guy.
Well, it's such an emotional game that I just think, like both of you guys talked about already, when you want to give feedback or you want to give coaching right after you're in the throes of competition where emotions are at an all-time high, you are more prone to making mistakes. And like you said, Nate, whether it's too much praise or whether it's flipping out, losing your mind a little bit, whatever it is, I think the more that you go along and the more you realize, giving yourself a little bit of time to think and digest, you end up getting a better message across, whether it's the next day or whatever. And I remember my first year coaching, I was at a coaching clinic listening to Paul Evans, Missouri State pitching coach, talking about how he's got this 24-hour rule. You won't even look at a pitcher, after they come out of a game until 24 hours, and they'll talk about their outing together. And at the time, I just thought, whatever, I was just trying to soak up information. He was a pretty well-respected guy. I kind of stuck to that motto because it sounded smart. It sounded good. But it's really worked for me, I think. And I fall into the trap all the time. After an inter-squad outing in the fall or something, I think there's times where when it's fresh on your mind, you don't want to let things escape you. And, hey, we need to correct this right now. Let's talk about it. But you guys would probably feel the same. But I think especially when an outing doesn't go favorably, whether or not you have information to get out that's either fresh on your mind or that you want to get out for whatever reason. A lot of times I just think it's in the best interest of the player. You guys probably I remember very clearly what it felt like when you go out and you get shelled, and it's not a good feeling. Each guy's different, responds differently, but to be honest, I didn't want anyone to come anywhere near me when I went out and busted my butt to prepare for the team all week long, and then I go and kind of drop the ball out there. It's not a good feeling. So I think it's just most of the time it's in the best interest of the player either to just kind of have some time to separate, think about it themselves, and then honestly, your feedback together from, pitching coach to pitcher next day, I just kind of think it's a little bit more of a productive process than we can kind of put two brains together that have had some time to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be, I don't know, wear my emotions on my sleeve, I guess you can say, especially when I'm in competition mode. So, I may not heed the best advice when, we come off a tough loss and we didn't pitch the ball that well. So I tend to give myself some time to kind of reflect and take a deep breath and try and process everything that went throughout the course of the game, just because I know I may not be in my best mindset to be able to give, feedback to our guys that they might be looking for. And like both you guys said, there's always a time and a place where, you might lose it a little bit and you're going to, you're going to have to wear somebody out, because I think that could be the only time you can get that point across. And then there's obviously other times where, you got to take a positive mindset. It could be, when things aren't going your way for a number of games, and you're just like, look, we got to try and stay positive through whatever it is that we're going through. But I think, at least from my perspective, and like Nate said, that I really like that he talked about was who he was, 5 years ago and 10 years ago as a pitching coach, was completely different than who he is now. And I feel like in my short time as a pitching coach, I've kind of been the same way, just because you do so much learning on a daily basis about things that did work for you and things that didn't work for you. One of those things being how do you handle yourself and your staff, especially after competition mode and games. So for me, it's been, let's kind of get away from the game a little bit to process everything that happened. Let me go back and take a look at the box score if we need to watch some video, and just kind of process everything a little bit better, so that way we can take a look and come up with a realistic idea of what it is we need to do this week. Because sometimes, these kids, they want to pinpoint, 15 different things that they may be doing wrong over the course of the game, when it's like, listen, man, you're getting yourself into 2-0 counts, every other hitter, when you're falling into those type of counts, well, guess what? The results aren't going to be in your favor. It's not your glove side's flying open. You feel like you're not using your lower half, or, that all this other stuff that they tend to, they want to try and point towards. So just being able to get away from the game and not say too much afterwards and keep things simple has been, I think, the best remedy that I've been able to figure out so far.
No, that's really good stuff. And as we were talking, I was thinking, like, not that the tone was too light and soft, but like Eeks, to your point, and I'm sure you guys do as well, I'll coach off of emotion a lot of the time. It's not, but it's not solely what I'm bringing to the table. So like after a frustrating game, like I need to let them know where I stand and where my emotion level is at. And I guess to me, it's like I'm now able to do that without going into, like, I don't shift gears in that talk. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm like ripping piss, yelling. Like, I don't think I'm not mature enough yet to like get off that highway and then go down this path of like how we get better from there. You know what I mean? Like, I need that time after a freak out or a helmet toss to like decompress and then like reevaluate what needs to happen as far as the plan. Do you guys have anything that you'd want to mention or ask the group? You don't have to, but if you got anything, now's a good time to ask and just kind of chop it up.
This is one thing that I was thinking about as we were talking about that stuff is I've had a couple conversations with people about this, and I don't want to sound like some crotchety old man saying this or whatever, but I do feel like today's player sometimes has a little bit more of a want or a need for immediate feedback for whatever reason. And I, like I said before, like sometimes I do fall into that trap, because if a player comes up and says, hey, how was that? Hey, how was my outing? What'd you think about this? Right away. It can be difficult to be able to tell them, hey, well, let's give it some time or whatever, or to give into it and actually give them your thoughts or whatever. But I found that, I don't know if you guys have seen that before, and I think it just goes back to different personality types and everything. Like I said, I was never a player that would have ever done that, but that is one thing that I've noticed with even just over the last 2, 3, 4 years here. I feel like more and more of my pitchers are guys that want that sometimes, and I actually don't always think it's best. So it's something that I've kind of learned to deal with a little bit as a coach. But I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I know I completely agree. Ton of guys come up after the game. Hey, what did you see? What did I do wrong? And it's a lot of times I've learned, going back to what we learned from I'm going to coach them better if they're sitting in my office the next day and we're able to have a 20-minute conversation face to face and be, after taking a deep breath and being able to have a conversation and, some dialogue back and forth, I think is the important thing. So yeah, I agree. And that's where, a lot of times that's been my response. Let's, come see me tomorrow, stop by the office and we're able to have a conversation, with each other. And that way there's a little bit more, it's not caught up in the heat of the moment. There's a little bit more dialogue back and forth, and you can get on the same page and get inside their head and they can have an understanding of what your thoughts were. So.
Yeah, Steve, I fall into the same. I find myself falling into the exact same trap. Whether it's most of the time, it's when guys are doing well and they want to come over there and they knock you on the shoulder and they say, "Hey, what'd you think? What'd you think you saw?"
It's
like,
that a lot of
it was
times.
good. You're 3 up, 3 down. Like it's what we're looking for. So you can pat on the ass and get going. But it's like you get caught up in it because like you feel like you want to coach, right? You want to try and say, all right, well, this is what I saw. This did well. This, that, and the other thing. And you're like, what? Then you're like, what is the point of that? You know what I mean? Because then it's like he just wants that reaffirmation to feel good of what he did. Or obviously other guys, they kind of come over there and they're just like, man, what's going on? And they just want to feel better about themselves because they just had a tough outing. So it's like they just want to talk through it with you. And then every once in a while you got to catch yourself. You're like, listen, let's just take a deep breath. It's not as bad as you think. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Or like Nate said, like come up to the office. And we could just kind of diagnose what it is that you did. Because honestly, like when you really look back on a lot of things that may go wrong over the course of an outing for a guy, it can be pinpointed to one or two really simple things. And obviously as a player, and I'm sure we can all agree when we were in that in their position, like we didn't always see that part of the picture, right? You just end up seeing that, I pitched 2/3 of an inning, I gave up 3 hits and 2 runs. And it's like, well, how did that all start? What kind of predicated that to get this, to kind of have your outing spiral out of control. But anyway, I think it's you hit the nail on the head, man. It's just you got to try and step away a little bit and say, look, we'll talk about this tomorrow, and we'll address it and kind of go from there. But it's been one thing that you got to try and work through with these guys to get them to understand, like you don't need this instant feedback the second that you walk off the field. And I've had guys do it almost in between innings, where it's like you've been working on some things with them that week leading up, and it's like they'll come off the after the first or second inning, they'll come up to you and be like, hey, what do you think? How does that look? Is that better? And I'm like, listen, man, just go out there and pitch. Like, we'll get me some outs. Like, that's all you need you to worry about right now. So,
Eags, I'll one up you on that. Like coaching first base, you get a kid who tops the ball through the 5-6 hole or bloops one in the right field, and he gets to first base, and like the first thing he wants to know is like, I fly out on that one? Like, did I fly open? Like, did I do this? Did I do that? And I'm just like, dude, you just got to hit. Like, you've been like 1 for 18. Like, take your knock and just be happy, be a good base runner.
Yeah.
And it's part of, us opening the doors to communication with like technology and training techniques, like, is great. In a hitting sense, these kids don't know when to I don't want to say these kids, but like sometimes my players have trouble self assessing where they're at and making their own decisions on progression. So like they come to me as well. Like I got to throw a BP to them every single day. We can't stop every 4 swings and talk about what's going on. Like it's time, like you got to put in a little bit of time yourself to figure it out and not need to lean on the coach, like otherwise BP is going to be like an hour long, and that's not good. And I think, it's something that's happened because we've opened the lines of communication. We want to give them as much information as possible, but we're losing the instincts that make a good ball player at times. You're taking either the competitive nature out of it or just the athleticism of them doing what their body is like naturally capable of doing, and that's where the line is, in a game, if somebody comes back after a punch out because they didn't swing at a strike, like I don't really have a whole lot to say other than like, you need to swing at strikes, like I can't teach you how to hit the one in the dirt. Like it's too hard. So, sometimes, and not that we shut guys out, but there's times where I just say, listen, man, like now's not the time. Like you guys are saying, and for you guys, it's different. your player is in control of the game with you three being pitching coaches. And he's in control of what's going on. But as a hitter, it's an open skill. Like, you have to read and process this pitch that's coming in at you in order to react to it and organize yourself the way that you need to. And there's so many things that can break down. So let's teach you how to learn how to fix that, as opposed to have to listen to me to tell you how to fix it, you know? And that's kind of what we do in training. And I know you guys probably have your own methods of having a kid self-assess what's going on and be able to recorrect it without you stepping in, without you running out to the mound in the middle of an inning, be like, hey, you got to do this. Like, he knows because of the practice formats and the drills that you guys have put him in, like, okay, I'm just going to check this box off. All right, I did this, I didn't do this. Let me just go back. I'll do this and see how it works, you know?
No,
But I think what do you got, Nate?
No, there's no doubt. I mean, we're doing our best job as coaches if the guys learn how to coach themselves, you know, and like I tell our guys, you know, they need to take ownership for their own career, you know, their own play. You know, they're the director of their own movie. They're not the actor, you know, and they're responsible for it. You know, so I think when they're learning how to coach themselves and take accountability, I mean, you see a lot of these guys, maybe they have their own strength coach, they have their own speed coach, they have their own hitting coach, their own fielding coach, you know, and at some point, you know, they need to take responsibility for their play. And, you know, I think as coaches, you know, we're doing our job if they're understanding that, and then they're taking ownership for that, and then they're able to coach themselves through those, you know, those mistakes and successes.
But I think the aspect of the game where this comes up constantly, I think with college age players, the high school age players, from what I've seen, guys, is guys being able to make adjustments from pitch to pitch in terms of being in the zone and commanding. You know, let's say some guy bounces a pitch, sails one, having the ability on the very next pitch, just knowing yourself, being able to feel what the mistake was, make an adjustment out there on your own. I think so often, like you just talked about, Nate, there's a lot of individual instruction and private lessons from a very young age nowadays, where every single pitch there's feedback from a guy that you're paying, you know, $50 an hour to or whatever. And I think unfortunately it takes away from a kid's ability to feel things out himself from pitch to pitch. And that's a huge skill of pitching. I think that's what being a good pitcher is all about, is making those adjustments from pitch to pitch, knowing your body, knowing your delivery. And yeah, this is one thing that constantly comes up in my mind, I think, as I get a new crop of freshmen every year. It's something I'm reminded of over and over again, and it's a skill we have to build.
Absolutely. I think, you know, with adjusting pitch to pitch, there's no there's no at bat that I'd rather watch than one where I'm like I'm thinking with the hitter, and I know that they're making adjustments, and I know the pitcher is as well. Like, whether it's like pitch sequence and stuff like that, like, you know, when these guys are going toe to toe and nobody really has the upper hand, and it comes down to, you know, I'll ask our pitching guy, like, hey, what are you throwing here? Because, like, I think that the hitter is looking for something, and then he's not throwing that pitch, but he follows it off, and you're like, hey, what are you throwing here? Like, that competing, that competitive, like, aspect of our game, I think, is top notch. And if you're not willing to make adjustments in at bats and pitch to pitch, like, you're not gonna get yourself in as many competitive at bats as possible. And as a hitter, that's the goal. Like, get into a competitive at bat and give yourself a chance. Does anybody else have anything? We'll go, like, we don't need to go longer, but if we want a couple more questions, we're good. Otherwise, you know, I thought that was pretty good.
I got a question.
So
this is actually for Steve, because, you know, Steve and I coached a number of years against each other when it was at Siena. And, you know, one of the things I do, obviously, I'm sure you do, is that, you know, I watch a lot of the other, you know, pitching guys, and, you know, how they handle themselves, how they handle their staff and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, one thing I always notice with you, Steve, is, you know, when you put a lot of trust in your guys, right? You know, both your obviously your pitcher and sometimes your catcher as well, with the way you kind of communicate with them. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. At different points, for the most part, you're calling the game, correct? Like you're calling the pitches throughout most of the game.
Yeah, it's varied at various points throughout different seasons.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting to. Like, there's certain guys on the mound that you tend to trust more, right? You'll kind of give them some signals and things like that about, all right, hey, this is the, you know, I want him to throw the pitch that he wants, or I want you to call a pitch that he wants. Like, right, that's kind of what I've gathered from watching your work for the most part.
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is, like, how do you feel comfortable with being able to do that? That's just obviously working with guys to know, like, all right, I feel like this guy's got a pretty good sense of who he is and how to attack these guys, and other, you know, other guys you clearly know, all right, this is a guy I have to call, you know, every pitch for, otherwise, you know, he's going to get himself lost and into trouble.
Right. I've found there are definitely there's definitely differences between each guy and all that stuff. And I think a lot of times it comes down to the catcher too. I mean, like at Siena, in a couple of years in particular, I just think we had a really, really smart catcher who was mature and knew the game extremely well, knew how to read hitters and sequence guys. And so sometimes it was, you know, there's so much on the line, and it means a ton to us as coaches. It's our careers and all that. So it can be difficult to give up the keys to the car a little bit. But I think sometimes I just realized, hey, he's got a little bit better perspective. I mean, at the end of the day, the catcher has the best perspective of what's going on the field. And, you know, we have all the information in the world. We've done the scouting reports. We've seen more games. A lot of times, I think that's why the majority of coaches end up calling every pitch of every game. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I end up calling them a ton of pitches throughout a game. But yeah, I think that's what it comes down to sometimes. If you understand your catcher has a really, really good ability to read not only the current at bat that's going on, but a catcher that's super tuned in to knowing your pitcher's strengths, knowing every pitcher on the staff. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I think we had a couple of guys at Siena too that were just their personality types. They were guys that were constantly thinking the game, and we're also good at reading hitters throughout an AB, which I wasn't good at that at all. I just wanted to know what to throw, nod my head and throw it. I left that up to other people, but I think it's just kind of reading the strengths of your players, understanding, do they really have a good feel for how to sequence and call a game? And if that is the case, sometimes I think when a kid knows, hey, my coach believes in me enough to give me that freedom. And at any point in the game, there's some guys that just know, like, hey, I know right now I can blow this fastball by a guy, or I know I'm going to make the adjustment on my slider and throw a really good one here. And, you know, sometimes I think that ends up freeing guys up and allowing for really good performances.
Awesome. Yeah, because it's like, you think about it all the time, you know, and it was one thing I always appreciated when I watched you kind of work with your staff, because I can just tell how that rapport worked. And it was always something I meant to ask you and never got a chance to. But, you know, I think about it all the time. It's like, do you have the you know, the personnel to be able to do that, to allow them to call your game. And then you also have, you know, the ability to say, all right, he just gave up, you know, a 2-run jack here in a pitch that I wouldn't have thrown. And you're just like, maybe this isn't a good idea. I don't know. And then, you know, your head coach is looking at you like, yeah, you think you want to keep doing this? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I have all the answers for you, but, you know, that's always something that, you know, I've griped with, but, you know, wanted to get a better idea of you know, the things that you did.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's great stuff, guys. I'm gonna stop the recording, but I appreciate